Hello from me, Lazar. We continue with the next lesson of the course. By creating a website from scratch, we can open the book. And let's go. And select this part. Construction stages. On a real and working website, I have opened the PDF file. And, having already met with the basics of HTML and CSS, it's time to set about creating our first sample and tutorial website. We will create it ourselves, with own forces and means, without any special tools. The idea is for you to figure it out yourself. The basics and principles and beyond. Gradually develop and upgrade in your own projects. But before we start the creation of our educational website, we'll take a look first, in short, how it is created and released in Internet Exploitation Real Website. Stages of construction on a real and working website. In general, the process of creating a real and working website, when we do it ourselves, usually goes through the following stages. First, stage of initial creation. This stage includes several important things. The idea, what kind of site we want to make. The reason we want to create the site, for example. To be useful to more people, like, let's share our experience in the field in which we are specialists. Let's introduce our company, your products that we produce, or commercial purposes. The subject of the site. Type of site, will it be a personal blog, company website, online store, sports site, and others? We have to determine and the target audience to which it will be directed. All these factors should be leading in determining the main concept of the site, of the appearance, of the color range, and in general, of functionality. Finally, careful consideration should be given to they judge and balance things. Second point of the chapter is the creation of a mock-up or template of the site. The next stage in the development of the site is to create its mock-up or template. This can be done in two ways: with a sketch or drawing on the site manually, on paper, or using a graphics program. Adobe Photoshop is most often used, but there are also many free editors that can do the same job. It is clear that with the help of a graphics program, it will turn out better and more precise result, but it requires knowledge and skills to work with it. And it is also much slower and more labor-intensive. Third point, building the site through the means of HTML and CSS. The next stage in the development of the site is to split the created layout of individual blocks and parts, and with the means of HTML and CSS to build already as a website, as at the same time it filled up with the relevant content. This is a very complicated stage, especially when we make the site from a sketch or drawing. Here it is especially evident, or not, the mastery of man who makes the site. This stage requires correct breaking the layout into separate blocks and parts, and in the case when working with sketch or drawing, among other things, must be correctly defined, the proportions and to be chosen, the appropriate colors. In making the modern ones, sites other than HTML and CSS, often use JavaScript, PHP, and more programming languages that will not, however, considered in this book, because they are quite complicated for now. For initial study. Further, once you've mastered the basics, you can now target them as well. Fourth point, initial site testing. The next stage is the initial testing of the site, init. Enter code validation, checks of the connections and the other functionalities. It is also checked whether everything works properly and if there are errors and inaccuracies, are removed. Testing is not a one-time process, but when found error or inaccuracy, it is corrected and then tested again to see whether the result is as expected. Unfortunately, it often happens, especially in the beginning, one thing to be fixed and another to be spoiled, but you will not despair. Over time, you will gain the necessary experience. Domain registration and selection of hosting. The next two stages before launch of the site on the internet are the registration of domain and the purchase of hosting. Domain registration, the domain is the web address on your site. It consists of a name, a dot, and extension, for example, abv.bg. To get a domain, we have to contact a company dealing with domain registration and to pay for this registration. And we should know, however, that the registration of domains is not forever, but for a certain period, for example, a minimum of 1 year. But before that we have to check whether the name is free of the domain we want to register. It might. We also register without a free domain. But these are domains with unpopular extensions and are not suitable for professional website. We'll look at them at the end. Depending on the extension, prices are different. For example, for Bulgaria, .bg is more expensive than .com. Let's say, or it is currently around 25 to 30 euros. At the moment when I wrote the book 2023. Now that I'm making the video, there's hardly any difference, slightly increased prices with about BGN 5 to 10. That is, by about 5 euros. For example, English. The speakers. The .com extension is approximate BGN 25 to 30. That is, about 15 euros per year. At least those are the prices of Bulgarian companies. Now for international, I have no observations. But the prices can quite vary from company to company, therefore, very carefully you should study the question before you buy a domain. Here's an example. Let's say we have a company named Comivam, and we want to make a company site and domain, and its name must be the same. We reverse to such a company for registration of domains. We check the name and see that it is free. Even after that, we pay our service fee, and we already have our domain comivam.com. Cyrillic domains are now available, but this is not established as a good practice because of the additional problems that arise. Choosing a hosting plan. Hosting is the physical place where the site files will be located. Usually these are the so-called servers, powerful computers permanently connected to the internet and provided with the necessary technical support and service. There are special companies created The so-called hosting companies that deal with the provision of space on websites against the corresponding monthly payment. They have different monthly plans depending on their quality of services. At the time of writing the book, the cheaper plans were about €5 per month. And here there is option for free hosting, but according to the famous expression, there is no free lunch. Or, if there is, you still have to give something in some form in return. We'll take a look. Such a variant at the end of the book. Usually the hosting companies. They also offer domain registration, so you can solve the hosting issue and domain through only one company. And the last one we will look at in this lesson is uploading the hosting site. The last stage is uploading a site. That is, the files from our site, on hosting. And the trial. It usually does use special programs for uploading files, FTP clients. The other option is hosting. The company to offer a file manager in your control panel is usually used. The so-called cPanel. And after its successful upload, does final testing and trial on the site. In general, this consists the creation and release process in exploitation of real website on the internet. In this case, we considered the creation of a site, which we make ourselves through HTML and CSS. Besides this, there are other ways to creating a site, for example by ordering to a company dealing with making websites through the so-called control systems of the content, through special programs from the type on. What you do is like that. You see, editors. And through specialized platforms, so-called site builders. But in that book it will not. We look at these things because the goal is to learn how to make a website yourself from scratch, with own forces and means. That's it for this tutorial. Best